ask you to do is to state your first and last names for the record and spell each.
My first name is Jeremy, spelled Jeremy. My last name is Phillips, Philipps.
And Mr. Floyd didn't drop dead while you were interacting with him, correct? You testified that you were the officer who approached the passenger side of the vehicle.
The only way I can make sense of the sentencing, and I also want everyone to understand where I'm coming from with regards to this, especially if there's going to be any appellate review of this sentence.
What happens when suspects get charged in court? What happens when these suspects turn out to be cops? These are cases where corrupt cops instantly get destroyed in courtrooms.
The thing I will ask you to do is to state your first and last names for the record and spell each.
My first name is Jeremy, spelled Jeremy. My last name is Phillips, Philipps.
Thank you. Go ahead, your witness.
Thank you. How are you employed, sir?
I'm employed with the City of Waukesha Police Department.
And how long have you worked in law enforcement?
I've been in law enforcement for a total of 14 years next month.
All with the City of Waukesha?
I have about 5 months with the City of Dodgeville Police Department in Wisconsin.
On November 21st, 2021, during a Christmas parade in Waukesha, tragedy struck when 76 people were caught in a horrific incident, leaving over 60 of them fatally injured. The person responsible was none other than Darrell Brooks.
All right. Sir, I'd like to direct your attention to the date of November 21 of 2021, please. Were you working that afternoon?
I was working that afternoon, yes.
What was your duty or assignment?
I was assigned a normal patrol beat, squad area 216 with the City of Waukesha on a 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. shift.
Were you aware there was a parade taking place in downtown Waukesha that afternoon?
I was aware that there was a Christmas parade downtown Waukesha.
Were you directly assigned to work the parade?
I was not assigned to work the parade.
In court, a policeman, Jeremy Phillips, is asked to testify before further hearings can continue, as he was one of the officers who witnessed the incident.
I received a complaint to respond in emergency fashion, which means light and siren, for subjects fighting in the park with a knife allegedly involved.
Where were you coming from?
I was in the patrol area of East Moreland, roughly at East Main Street at the time. That's where I was responding from.
Was Main Street shut down at the time for the parade?
Main Street where I was responding from was not, no.
Okay.
Jeremy claims to have received an emergency call for victims fighting with weapons involved and had been dispatched to the area later that day.
What do you remember seeing?
As I neared the vicinity of White Rock Avenue at Baxter, directly in front of me appeared to be a unmarked patrol vehicle, silver in color, which was blocking the roadway at White Rock Avenue and Hartwell Avenue. And I believe off to the side, I could also see a marked patrol vehicle.
Could you see any floats or people participating in the parade?
At that particular time, as I arrived in the vicinity, I did not. I just saw the side of a squad car with emergency lights activated. It wasn't until a little while later I saw that there were floats and such on the other side of that patrol vehicle.
The silver colored SUV with lights, red and blue lights activated, do you know whose squad car that was?
That belonged to Sergeant Dave Warner.
Where did you go?
When I arrived to the area, initial dispatch information stated that this alleged fight involving a knife was somewhere in the vicinity of the Schutze building where the boat ramp was. Based on my training and experience of that vicinity, I know that the boat rental checkout is on the back side of the Schutze building, so that's the initial area I responded to and where my attention was drawn to.
After he speaks, an exhibit of a map is brought out so the cop can identify the places he claimed to have been through.
I drove around in the parking lot of the Schutze building. There was another officer already on scene who, from my understanding, was already on foot in and around the vicinity of the Schutze building and advised that they could not find anybody at the Schutze building.
Another officer's out on foot? What do you do?
At this point, the officer came over the radio and stated he could not find anybody in the vicinity. I was listening and monitoring the radio, and at some point, what I thought was a reserve officer came over and said that they were speaking with a couple of subjects potentially involved. So at that time, I got on the radio and said I was going to attempt to meet with the caller because I didn't exactly know who this reserve officer was speaking to, how many subjects were involved, if they were actually involved or just a witness to the situation. All of that information was completely unbeknownst to me, so I decided I should probably go meet with a reserve officer and figure out who these subjects are and what the involvement was.
This reserve officer was working as part of the parade, is that right?
He was in the vicinity right at Sergeant Dave Warner's location.
Okay.
The officer claims to have gotten a distress call and, on getting to the location, finds a reserve officer who he doesn't know. He says he tries to meet with the caller to get more information from them instead, as the reserve officer claims to be speaking with those potentially involved.
Before I could fully reach that intersection, there was approximately 3 subjects off to my right-hand side on the sidewalk that were yelling, screaming, and waving, like flagging me down. The way that they were doing this, they appeared to be in distress. They appeared that they needed immediate help, and certainly appeared that they needed to speak with somebody in law enforcement.
So I assume you pulled over.
I pulled over, I rolled down my passenger window, and 2 of the subjects started yelling that their friend had been assaulted. So it was right at that point that they started trying to tell me that their friend had been assaulted, that information came over the radio on the primary dispatch channel that something had happened downtown and somebody had been hit. So at that point, my attention started to get a little bit diverted because hearing that on the radio is not something that just happens every day. That perks you up pretty quickly to figure out, that could be a serious injury, that could be more officers needed, something to that effect. So that took my attention away briefly. As I looked back at the subjects, they started to again say that their friend had been assaulted. So I said, hold on, let me pull over so I can get out, so I can speak with you directly in person and figure out what was going on.
Jeremy claims to have met some people who flagged down his vehicle with claims that their friend had been assaulted. Seeing this as a trivial matter, Jeremy stops his vehicle to hear them out. They tell him their friend has been assaulted by a boyfriend. When he meets with the assaulted lady, she tries to downplay it and says it was just a verbal argument, but he can see swelling, bruising, and a black eye on her face. He also tried to investigate further before he got another call from the radio.
The calls on the radio at that point were 1078 after 1078 after 1078.
Okay, what does that mean?
So 1078 in law enforcement jargon is officer needs immediate assistance right now, all available units. As that was being called multiple times, other people were coming on the radio and stating there were subjects down in the street, then it was 10 people down, then it was 15, then it was to 30 or 40. And I had to make a decision at that point, speaking with the subjects, particularly the one who appeared to be involved and the most injured, who was not being cooperative with me, that the greater danger and the clear and present threat that was happening downtown had to draw my attention. I had to leave.
All right. The events that you've described for us so far, are those all captured on your squad video, sir?
Yes.
And at that time, in November of 2021, were you wearing a body camera?
I was not wearing a body camera at that time.
The officer is now left to choose between the case of the lady who was beaten by her boyfriend and is refusing to cooperate and the case just announced on his radio. He chooses the latter.
I leave the area. I tell her I'm sorry that I had to go. I went down White Rock, navigated float traffic, went down East Main Street in a westbound direction, and eventually came to East Main Street at Barstow Street, where I exited my patrol vehicle.
A recording is then played in court as proof that everything said so far is the truth.
When you got to Main Street, where'd you go?
When I got to Main Street, as most of you probably just saw in the video, I took a westbound direction all the way down to Barstow. There's still floats in the parade. I think there was a lot of people that didn't exactly know what was happening in front of them. When I got to Barstow and exited my patrol vehicle and you saw me running down towards the center of the street, at that point I was just trying to assist any officer, EMS, civilian individual that was around, and it was just mass chaos, carnage everywhere.
Did you attempt to render aid to some injured individuals?
There was approximately 2 to 3 individuals I can remember talking to directly. They were all members of the band. I don't know which band it was. It was one of the high school bands. They were in the vicinity just west of Barstow on Main. There was a number of them laying in the street, obviously injured. I had face-to-face contact with a few of them laying on the ground. There were parents screaming at me to help their kids. I did what basic measures that I could take as far as emergency life-saving goes. I checked pulses. I asked them to squeeze my finger, asked them what hurt, what they could move. The 2 or 3 I talked to could still move. They could still talk. They could tell me what hurt. There were multiple people standing around them, also providing aid. At that point, some of the radio traffic that I was picking up on, I was gathering that potentially a vehicle had driven through the parade and hit some of these individuals. I contemplated throwing some of these people in my patrol vehicle and trying to get them to a hospital. However, my vehicle just simply isn't equipped to have that kind of space or room to do that, given the fact that I didn't want to try to move anybody unnecessarily that would have caused further damage to them, especially if somebody's involved in blunt force trauma, such as a car crash.
Jeremy gets to the location of the incident to find multiple people injured. With his police vehicle not having enough space for the injured victims, he has no choice but to wait for an ambulance. In the process of waiting, he learns that a car had driven through the parade and crushed some of the paraders.
The third person I came across was also a band member. She was a female. Her leg was obviously injured. She was being held upright by a couple of adults. And I asked her what was wrong, what was hurting, if there's anything more serious with her as she was being held up. And she said, "Officer, I saw what happened. I saw who did this." And I said, "What can you tell me?" And she said, "A red SUV sped through the parade and did this." She didn't say anything more than that. I said, "Okay." I was like, "Stay with your family, stay with your parents. Somebody will be by with an ambulance to get you shortly." I was made aware a little while after my involvement directly in the downtown area, yes.
Did you learn the name of the person who had been taken into custody?
Yes.
What was that name?
I knew from radio traffic at the time that it was a Daryl Brooks. I didn't know the date of birth or middle name or anything at that point.
At some point later, after the chaos had somewhat settled, did you have an opportunity to go back and try and investigate the initial complaint you had taken from Erica Patterson?
Yes, I did.
Once the case had settled, Jeremy claimed to have returned to the lady who had allegedly been assaulted by her boyfriend and surprisingly found that she's linked to Brooks.
And specifically, could you find anything linking Ms. Patterson to the defendant, Daryl Brooks?
Objection. Hearsay.
Overruled.
I did find information through our reporting system and other law enforcement sources to directly link Erica Patterson to Daryl Brooks, yes.
And did that information also directly link Daryl Brooks to a vehicle described as a red SUV?
Yes, it did.
Jeremy is then cross-examined by Daryl Brooks, who makes him look like he's being paid to give testimonies against him.
I noticed, Officer Phillips, you are in uniform this afternoon. Were you scheduled to work today?
Yes.
So it would be fair to say that you would be on duty as of now if you weren't giving testimony in this matter.
I would be on duty right now, yes.
It would also be fair to ask if it would be fair to say that you giving testimony right now, you're still getting paid for it.
I am currently employed by the City of Waukesha Police Department on a working patrol shift, on a normal shift for myself, yes.
Would it be fair to say that you are getting paid right now as we speak?
Mr. Brooks, if you did anything to further investigate the initial fight that you were dispatched to, do you remember that question?
Yes.
Did you in fact relay to detectives who were working on this parade incident the information you had found out about the link between Erica Patterson and Daryl Brooks?
Yes.
To your knowledge, did detectives then follow up?
To my knowledge, it's detectives that followed up on any further investigation regarding the fight itself.
This cop was definitely able to save himself, but our next cop clearly isn't.
And Mr. Floyd didn't drop dead while you were interacting with him, correct?
No.
You testified that you were the officer who approached the passenger side of the vehicle. You approached George Floyd on May 6th of 2019, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you had your gun drawn when you approached Mr. Floyd, isn't that right?
Yes, I pulled it, yes.
And when you approached Mr. Floyd, he said, "Don't shoot me, man, I don't want to get shot," right?
Something like that, yes.
You told him to undo his seatbelt, correct?
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
And he did that, right?
Yes, he did.
George Floyd died on May 25th, 2020 after a white cop, Derek Chauvin, pressed his knee against George's neck. At Derek's trial, the video of Floyd's arrest on May 6, 2019 was brought up. It was said that George was a passenger in an unlicensed vehicle.
And then you said, put your hands where I can see them, correct?
Yes.
And then he put his hands in the air?
Yes.
And then you told him to put his hands on the dash, is that right?
That's correct.
And that was when you grabbed his hand and forcibly put it on the dashboard of the vehicle, correct?
Well, and yes.
And then the other officer with you on the other side of the vehicle changed that to put your hands on your head, correct?
That's correct.
And then he put his hands on his head, right?
That's correct, yes.
And there was one officer who said that they were going to tase him, right?
That's what I heard, yes.
And you were yelling pretty loud, correct?
Yes, I was, yes. It escalated real quick.
With this officer admitting to visibly coercing Floyd to do as they wish, it is safe to say this incident would amount to what would lead to his death.
Some profanity as well, correct?
Yes.
And you had your gun drawn the whole time you were giving commands, right?
Once I started ordering him and he refused to show me his hands, yes, it escalated where I pulled my gun, yes, ma'am.
And he was awake, correct?
What's that, ma'am?
Mr. Floyd was awake. Was he awake during this incident?
Yes.
He was conscious?
Yes.
He didn't appear to be in medical distress to you when you were pulling him out of the car, is that right? He was talking to you, he was standing up, is that right?
I don't know if it was specifically, sometimes he was talking, sometimes he was mumbling. He was incoherent in my mind a lot of the time during there.
But you got him out of the car and you handcuffed him, right?
That's correct, ma'am.
He asked you not to beat him up, correct?
That's correct, yes.
He was able to walk, right?
Yes, he was.
He continued to talk to you. While you were interacting with Mr. Floyd, he didn't collapse on the ground, correct?
Wait a minute, what was the question? Can you speak up a little louder, ma'am?
While you were interacting with Mr. Floyd, he didn't collapse on the ground, correct?
No, he did not.
Though he claims George was totally fine before and after the arrest, it is still believed that this arrest was what orchestrated his death. This cop and every other cop involved in this case not only get canceled by the public, they also lose their jobs and are currently facing criminal charges. Our next cop definitely tried to run from the law, but the law finally caught up with him. On 2016 at the Tonawanda Town Court in New York, a couple was seen having an argument with Michelle Lewandowski. It is claimed that the couple refused to leave the courtroom even after Officer Michael had told them to. Soon, another officer appears at the scene, and soon, Michael pulls the man forcefully from his seat, leaving the woman alone and watching her husband being dragged outside. Michael then returns and pushes the woman against the door, outside the courtroom. Michael is seen with other officers hitting the man multiple times, with the woman arguing and trying to intervene, but Michael pushes her to the wall, knocking her head. She is then warned by one of the officers to stay back. They are then handcuffed later. After this incident, no charges were filed. Michael was, however, suspended for 10 days for the use of force, but this was later reduced to 5 days. This footage remained hidden until 4 years later when a local TV station presented it as proof of misconduct by the officer. After the video gets released, Michael is then fired from the police department. That cop finally got what he deserved 4 years later, but our next cop definitely got his judgment instantly.
The only way I can make sense of the sentencing, and I also want everyone to understand where I'm coming from with regards to this, especially if there's going to be any appellate review of this sentence.
Michael Dotro, a former Edison police officer, was charged with firebombing his supervisor's home and other retaliations he had orchestrated against those who wronged him.
The sentence to be imposed in this particular case is because Mr. Dotro, through his conduct and his admissions, spanning from 1998 to this year, represents the worst that we can possibly expect from someone in our society. Yes, he's caused very specific damage to Captain Endurkel and his family, to Ms. Zog, to Ms. Dotro, to his own parents, to his families, to his brothers. But what he's really done, and what we're going to be left with after he's walking out the door to spend the next third of his life in prison, is allow people a basis to say that our system of justice has no integrity. How could it, when we've allowed this particular individual like him, here in Middlesex County, here in Edison, to do the things that he's done. Similar to what we see on the news every day from other parts of the country. Because of what this individual has done, because of him and people like him, victims are afraid to come forward to be part of the criminal justice system and get the relief that they're entitled to from being victimized, because they have no faith in it, because they don't know who to trust.
Dotro is sentenced to 20 years in prison for his misconduct. Before his sentencing, the judge gives a speech on how and why they decided to give Dotro such a sentence, even though he's also a law enforcement officer. He speaks about the law and why he wants victims to have faith in the law once more.
Even more importantly, we have other individuals every day who put on a badge which represents honor, service, and integrity. Without question, go out there every day, leave their family behind to protect an entire community with hopes that they can make it through the day, through the end of their shift, so that they can go back home to their family and lead a normal human being life, because the life of a police officer is not a normal human being life.
The judge's last words are filled with a lot of wisdom. It is important to praise the cops who do their jobs diligently and in the right manner. Do you think the officer got his fair share of punishment, or did he deserve more? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like the video, subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one we have in store for you. Thanks for watching. This is Detective Mystery signing off.